Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to day 3 of the Sustainability Summit 2022. It has been so fulfilling. It reminds me of the greatest quotes that I have heard, that there are opportunities even in the most difficult circumstances and situations. And, in our discussion in the past 2 days, we've had discussions around infrastructure development. How can that be sustainable? We've spoken about energy efficiency. We shouldn't be having load shedding when we can renew energy and find other sources of development. We also spoke about the youth yesterday, closing off a powerful session saying, let the youth be the spark that ignites the change, in society and in the world. So that was really amazing. But day 3 also comes with a lot of benefits. And joining me this morning, we are going to be talking about waste, achieving a vision, net zero waste, according to the United Nations and some of the SDG goals as well. And we know that, the national pricing strategy for waste management has placed a strong emphasis around achieving a cost-effective and a zero waste to landfill waste management option. So we're going to have this discussion this morning, and joining me, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my esteemed panelists, we have Mr. Andile Tlotlela, who's a non-executive chairman at IWASA. We also have Edith Luuta, who's the CEO for Fiber Circle. We have Ian Gulant, who is joining us all the way from Scotland. He's the Chief Executive Officer for Zero Waste Scotland. We also have,
Mr. Chad Robertson, who's the CEO and co-founder of Regionize. We also have Telly Chauke, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for Kucha Development Corporation. Thank you very much to all of you joining us this morning and for taking the time to engage. I think maybe we can start here. How can waste be better commercialized? Because, in different spaces, in different countries, in different regions, I think we haven't been thoroughly conscientized about waste. So let me start with Ian, and then we'll have Edith, we'll have Andile, Chad, and Telly. Mr. Gulant, over to you.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Thank you, Tabby, and great opportunity to speak to you today from my office here in a rather wet Scotland, unfortunately. But I'm very interested. Obviously, I'll just tell a little bit about who I am and head up Zero Waste Scotland, which is Scotland's circular economy expert agency. We are an organisation that's fully funded by the Scottish Government to support the transition to a more circular economy, to reducing waste, increasing recycling levels, but more importantly, tackling consumption. So that's probably my starting point when you ask the question, Tabby, about what 3 things do we need to start thinking seriously about if we want to achieve zero waste. So we think creating a more circular economy is part and parcel of that, but we really do need to consume a lot less of the Earth's natural resources. We've done some analysis here. So in Scotland, 80% of our carbon footprint, 80% of Scotland's carbon footprint comes from the consumption of products and materials, half of which actually come from other parts of the world. So the impact that we're having is not just here in Scotland, but it's actually a global impact. So we really seriously need to do it. We know the climate change impacts of that, but also the biodiversity stresses and etc., and all the social impacts of some of those material extraction as well. So we need to reduce that, and just to put us in the real bad corner for Scotland, our consumption equals something like 18.4 tonnes per person per year of materials, and scientists will say a more sustainable level of consumption is actually 8 tonnes per person. So Scotland is well above double the consumption of materials. So that is something. So regardless of how we talk about waste and recycling, we really do need to reduce that consumption first and foremost. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about involvement of everyone. I think we've learned in our journey around the circular economy that this isn't a waste management issue anymore. This is about people at the end of the pipe trying to clean up the mess. This is about involving all parts of industry, society, from producers, material designers, product designers, and even individual citizens to be part of this. And I think that's the second thing we've learned in our engagement? How do we get everybody into the room to have these types of conversations, not just to look at the challenges, but to look at the opportunities? And the third thing is really about that systems approach. So again, just not looking at particular parts of the waste system or the production system in isolation. How do we look at the whole part? You know, and that's particularly prevalent when we think about food. You know, thinking about what we grow, how we grow it, how we produce it, how we manufacture it, how we display it, how do we retail it, and ultimately how do we actually consume it in our homes? How do we look at all of that in the round if we're serious about reducing food waste? And even when we think about, you know, for us, we're now beginning to start thinking about the design of future technologies. So thinking about all the low carbon infrastructure that I'm sure you've all been talking about over the last couple of days, that we're all now deploying, whether that's wind farms, solar panels, heat pumps. Every country on the earth is now deploying huge amounts of infrastructure. So how do we ensure that that's not waste of the future when we want to upscale some of that equipment, or re-technology needs to repower it? So how do we design it in such a way that it can be refurbished, remanufactured or reused, in years to come, and it becomes much more part of the infrastructure. So it becomes an asset that we continue to use rather than it's here for 10, 20 years and then, as I said, becomes away. So that's the kind of systems approach that we're now beginning to embed in our economic system. So there's probably three things to start, but yeah, there's probably other things about how the role of government I can talk about as well, the role of local government as well. It's not all about central government, it's the role of local government to create the right environment and the right infrastructure to ensure that citizens can play their part. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the insight, Ian, and we're looking forward to engaging further on that note. Can we have Edith? Hi, Edith. Please unmute your mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. In a cloudy Johannesburg, a bit nippy today, but I'm quite happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to learning from my colleagues on the call today. I am the CEO of Fiber Circle, and Fiber Circle is a producer responsibility organization responsible for the paper and paper packaging sector in South Africa. In and around 2000, the 5th of November 2000, legislation was passed in South Africa. The regulation was passed in South Africa where producers of paper and paper packaging materials and other products had a responsibility to look at the end of life of products so that we divert waste from landfill. And from a paper and paper packaging point of view, we have a long history of success in diverting paper from our landfills, with over 1 million tons of paper going back into the circular economy and being recycled in South Africa. So we are proud of this history. There's lots to be done still, and lots of innovation and research still that needs to be done. But I think that we come from a legacy of great collaboration and with paper being used every day. Our birth certificates are on paper. We use paper every day in our daily lives. Our children learn to write their first words on paper. So paper plays a critical part of our lives, and we are committed to making sure that all our paper gets diverted from landfill and gets reused. There's ongoing research that's been done in our sector. Previously, we could recycle paper up to 7 times, and that has increased significantly now in the circular economy. So our aim is really to divert paper and paper packaging from the landfill. And I think from a circularity point of view, if you look at the value chain, there's lots of support that can happen from an enterprise development perspective with collection systems. There is a lot of effort now being put in from not just the PRO for paper, the producer responsibility for paper, but other producer responsibilities for other materials to support the informal sector in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. We're looking forward to engaging further, just especially around, the paper packaging. You brought it home to say our birth certificates are on paper. That was so unique. we don't think about the value of something until we engage with how much meaning it actually has to us. So thank you for that. Can we have Andile, please?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
I've been listening attentively. Thank you. And once again, thank you for the opportunity for us to make a contribution. You asked a question about how can waste be better commercialized. I think where you are asking the question, I think from where we are sitting, you are maybe ahead. Maybe I'll just have to take us back from a design thinking point of view. If I just borrow those. I think the first thing is that we need to just take all the role players, because if you're going to commercialize anything, there are many other stakeholders that need to be involved. So I think what we need to do is we need to go back and build this net zero concept with the relevant stakeholders that are going to be involved in the ultimate commercialization of waste, because that's where we are ahead. We know the value, we know all the other benefits. I mean, we are speaking to the converted, but I think our role here is to go back and not impose these concepts to the relevant stakeholders, but to almost pretend that they don't exist. And we know who the stakeholders are, who are going to make the commercialization sustainable, because we just don't want to cut the ribbons and clap hands and just say, yes, we've done it, we're launching this as a model. But what we want it to be sustainable. And it's the stakeholders and the role players that are going to be responsible for making it sustainable. So we need to go backwards and pretend that this does not exist, and then build it up with them, so that ultimately they first see value. We bring them to where we are. We cannot afford to have a very small community of advocates and champions. We need to increase the population of people that are conscious about e-waste, sustainability, and the environment. So that's the first. So I'm essentially saying, in your question on how waste can be commercialized, is basically to go back and make sure that now that we've now have a regulatory framework in place, of course there are issues there and there, but I believe that we've left so many people behind in terms of them realizing the number of commercial opportunities that can be generated from job creation, from enterprise development. And before the commercialization, there's what I call social innovation. So we can just even create an environment where it is acceptable to come up with innovations around waste, even if those innovations don't end up being commercialized, because those that are going to be commercialized are going to come from within a particular basket of innovation that is available. So that's my contribution in terms of how can we better commercialize waste. In short, I'm basically saying, let's rally the stakeholders that are going to be part of the sustainability of the commercialization of e-waste. We are ahead. I mean, if you look at the amount of gravitas the sustainability week should be having, I mean, it should be the topical issue, for example, in a country like South Africa, because this is one area where we can make a huge dent in unemployment rate in South Africa, based on the ecosystem and the level of skills that is required. We should be having people wanting to participate, wanting to share ideas around how we can increase the size of the opportunity.
100%. Thank you very much. You're quite correct in saying back to the basics is quite necessary, and focusing on the building blocks before we even get to the commercialization aspect. So thank you for that. We look forward to engaging further. Chad?
Thanks, Sabang. And I think I'll just continue from where Andile left off. You left us in a great position. Talking about the topic of commercialization. And so just to give context, I am from a company called Regionize, and we essentially are on a mission to make zero waste solutions accessible, attainable, and inclusive here in South Africa. And so, just to continue the conversation, Antile made a very good point about going backwards and increase the population, which I totally agree with. You know, I was just reminiscing about this process of zero waste. And if we look at the concept of zero waste, it's about, you know, not creating waste, but we've made it a very complicated process. If you think about how we used to live, I would say when I was slightly more younger, you know, there was things like hand-me-downs. We used to repair our fridges. We used to fix our clothes. You know, my mom when I was young made all my clothes for me. So, you know, it's not this very complicated thing. It's a very simple thing, and we have to go back, as Tabang has just mentioned. And so what we find is that people who have less means are already living the zero waste lifestyle as much as possible, versus people in the middle and upper sectors who's just consuming so much. So, you know, maybe the conversation is not always just a waste problem. It's about also bringing other stakeholders to the table, talking to your, you know, the mass producing sectors as well, the marketing departments of that. It's not a waste problem, it's a people problem. So I think we have a lot of commercialization in South Africa, and I believe it's somewhat over commercialized at times because so many people are dependent on waste to make a living. We have a large informal sector. We have a lot of small or micro startups and SMEs in the waste sector. And the issue is that a lot of them are fighting for the same pie. And what I think we as an industry need to do is to open up that idea of how to commercialize waste. It's not simply just collecting waste and selling it, because that's obviously the low-hanging fruit. And I think that is very overpopulated as a sector. There's a long value chain from the whole zero waste lifestyle and the zero waste value chain. And so I think it's, just showing people opportunities. We've seen some good ideas in the past, like Rediso with the tire processes. Obviously that didn't fare out very well, but it was a good way to show people what can be done. And I think from a consumer perspective, it's, you know, we're always talking about making it convenient. And just had this conversation yesterday with someone about convenience. And it's, you know, it's not about making it convenient. It's about people realizing how important this is. It's not a gimmick. It's not a fad that we're just trying to push onto people. But the situation we have again, and especially in South Africa and other developing nations, is that it's difficult to convince people to change their lifestyles to do what's supposed to be done from an environmental basis if they still focus on basic issues such as where they're going to get their food, where they're going to get their water from. Is the water truck coming later? Does my child have food for school? And so, it's complex because we're facing so many difficult issues. You know, when I entered this industry, it was about how do we get people to recycle? That was my motivation. I came from a software background, thought, how do we get people to change behavior using incentives and various technologies? Today, we are bringing in zero waste solutions into spaza shops. We are working with the informal sector, developing decentralized recycling units in communities, because we realize that, you know, it's not just about technology and waste. There's more important things that people are focused on. And money is a big factor with that. And like I said, this is a very large conversation. So I'm looking forward to fighting into it deeper.
Thank you very much, Chad. And also you really brought something close to home, the people problem, because every initiative, every incentive starts with the people, you know, and I look forward to engaging further on how do we integrate them, the users themselves, into achieving the net zero. So thank you for that. Telly?
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to this wonderful panel and to you, Tabang. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just want to quickly...
Please switch on your camera if possible. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Telly.
I hope the angle is right. I've got it's placed in a very strange place on my keyboard.
Okay,
but,
no problem.
All be that. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be part of this panel, and I'm already finding a lot of, I guess, synchronicity with what some of the panel speakers have already spoken about, because I think we're all on the same page. And the issue is getting it done. And I know with Climate Week in New York, the theme is getting it done. And I think all around the world, the narrative is getting it done. And so I think we need to start talking about those aspects that get it done. I'm Telly Chauke. I'm a Chief Sustainability Officer at the CDC. The Coherence Development Corporation, just by way of quick introduction, is a public entity based in the Eastern Cape. We are wholly owned by the provincial government of the Eastern Cape, and we are mandated by the Special Economic Zones Act to operate the Coherence SEZ. However, we do have a footprint that is wider than just the Eastern Cape. We also play a role as an implementing agent for other government departments, both nationally and provincially. And we have a footprint on the continent as well, where we are responsible or entering into the space of supporting African governments in terms of establishing logistics parks and various other spaces that support economic development, industrialization, and the manufacturing community at large. So this topic, Thabang, is essential, and it's very core to us as an operator of an SEZ, as well as a player in the infrastructure space. And to answer your question quickly, and you know, I do have some, I guess, some fundamental pain points around the topic specifically because I've worked in the local government sector and I'm now working in an industrialized type of community. And so sometimes we find that there's quite a bit of policy incoherence between the manufacturing and industry space as well as local government space in terms of whose job is it to get it done. So how do we then get it done from a commercialization perspective? I think, Thabang, there are 3 points that I want to talk to. And one is the cost of inputs. So in any commercial value chain, the cost of inputs has a huge bearing in terms of the pricing of the product. And currently the cost of inputs, and by inputs when we say we're talking about waste, is that cost is driven by what local governments are doing in terms of performing their waste service authority function, and then what industry is doing from an extended industry, extended producer responsibility perspective. So I think it's important for us to think about the cost of inputs in terms of waste feedstock. We know that municipalities are the waste service authority in South Africa, and their responsibility is to collect, transfer, and dispose of waste. Talking to general waste and household waste. And this tends to be waste that is not separated at source, waste that often is a mix or mashup of household waste, commercial waste, packaging waste, paper waste, as well as food waste. So what I think becomes important is how do we strengthen the role of local governments to support the reclamation industry from curbside right until landfill, and then providing material recovery facilities, transfer stations, and infrastructure for the small player like your informal waste pickers, like your SMEs in the space to be able to offtake, therefore flattening the cost of the input and then allowing that feedstock to then flow through the recycling value chain. An important aspect that I also think we need to consider in this conversation, and perhaps it will come up later on, is routes to market. We know that whilst there are significant players in the recycling economy, we know that it's really underpinned by the small guy. It's underpinned by the informal waste pickers, small operators, and often they struggle with gaining access to markets or routes to markets. And this is about supporting infrastructure and organizing themselves. And so I think we also need to look at how do we pay attention to providing routes to market, specifically for the small guy, in terms of providing incentives, supporting infrastructure, as well as funding models and funding instruments, I think are important. And then we often hear in the policy space, Thabang, a lot about extended producer responsibility. And I think it's important for us to coin an extended consumer responsibility phrase. To do that, we need to be able to shape demand. And so the average consumer in South Africa, and I'm talking about your low to middle income earners are concerned about receiving their product and consuming their product, and not necessarily about its cradle and its grave. And so we need to be able to shape consumers in the way they identify with products, the way they receive and consume products, but also what role or interest they play in the disposal of waste. I'll give you an example with a recent purchase that I made of an electronic device. It came in a different box, and the SIM card came in a different box. And the SIM card came in a huge box, in an envelope with plastic packaging and a foam coat for just a micro SIM.
Imagine.
And so I asked myself, the producer, what were they thinking? But I could also have gone for a digital SIM, for example, and avoided that entire. So I think we need to be able to shape demand. Lastly, Thabang, and I know I'm probably going a little bit further than I should.
Go ahead, girl. We love
touch
it.
on issues of policy coherence. There is an untapped value chain right now in terms of industrial waste and commercial waste. And entities like my own are looking into how we can draw benefit from construction waste and industrial waste, and support a circular economy within our SEZ. So we're exploring a couple of project concepts around how we can have our tenants within our SEZ being able to draw benefit from each other's waste streams. And I think this is an important lesson that we need to be able to infuse across different SEZ operators, but in industry as a whole, is that there are certain parts of the value chain that are perceived as either too costly to invest in or difficult to manage from a policy restriction perspective. And that's why I always touch on policy coherence. If we are pushing in the industrial community, we are pushing dematerialization, decarbonization. We have to be able to incentivize those actions for industry by providing ease of doing business or ease of investing in other alternatives and options. So that's it for now, and I hope we can dig into those points a little later on. Thank you.
100%. Edith, I felt like I'm in a church that speaks about waste, and I'm getting it. So, wow, we're getting it, Thank you so much.
We're totally getting it, Thabang.
100%. And maybe I was just saying, sorry, I was flipping the names. I meant Telly, but Edith, I actually wanted to call you because I saw you nodding your head on some of the comments and sentiments that were shared by Telly, particularly around the routes to markets, and particularly around how do we create that extended consumer responsibility. So please help us with that, and then we'll go to Ian. Thank you, Telly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I could listen to Telly the whole day. I think that Telly is 100% correct when she says that, yes, there's the extended producer responsibility, but there is also the extended consumer responsibility.
Sure.
I think often we buy something and then we see that triangle that says that it's recyclable, or and what happens is we see it, but what do we do with it? And we discard it in our bins, and then it gets mixed with our pap and our gravy and all sorts of other things. And I think that Telly touched on such an important aspect where we're talking about, the collaborations that need to happen from a policy point of view, so that there's some coherent nature in which we approach our waste issue in South Africa. The truth of the matter is that the extended producer responsibility came about because we are fast running out of landfill airspace in South Africa. And land is such an important commodity. And historically in South Africa, we know the value of land. And it would be such a shame if we are using our land to build more landfills. That's not the solution. The solution for us is how do we conscientize our consumers and also how does the municipality come to the party in making sure that wet waste is handled differently from our dry waste. So separation at source is absolutely key to us. If a paper is soiled, there's nothing that we can do about it, which is sad. And we find that we still have quite large sums of paper that gets mixed with household waste in particular and ends up in landfill because our mills cannot handle soiled paper. So if we're talking about, that collaboration that's required, we really do need a solution around wet waste and food waste in South Africa. And I think that we haven't really gotten to a point where we're having conversations with the right people in the room, talking about how are we going to be supporting this for the circular economy in South Africa. It's a big problem. It's not just paper that gets soiled. You can think of even plastic products. When they get soiled, you need to have a wash bay that increases your energy consumption. So I think that there is a lot of conscientization that needs to happen. And coming to what Andile is saying, perhaps it's important to take a step back and say, how do we educate our consumers with the right sort of information so that this is a tool that they can use to have a more sustainable outlook in how they impact the environment.
Thank you so much, Edith. Perhaps, Ian, you can come in there, particularly just commenting what is central to the net zero agenda. And when we speak about net zero regarding waste, what do we actually mean? Because, there are viewers that are here and they want to understand, what does the net zero agenda, what is it essentially? And what is net zero when it comes to waste?
I do wish I could answer that in one sentence. I think building on, it's quite incredible sitting here, because all of the things that the other panelists are talking about are really real and present in Scotland as well. And some of it is about the fact that our waste system that we've established here in Scotland is inaccessible to, as people have said, other parts of the community, the industry, to access the materials. It's very efficient in terms of a waste system, so it feels like a bit of a, you can put your bins out, you can get your bins collected quite efficiently, and that stuff is taken away. But the real opportunity to reduce waste and create that economic and that social story that everybody's been talking about is actually not in waste. It's actually in the individual materials, the individual products that we're putting into the waste stream. So we really, somebody said about social separation, it's how do we access that and how do we start that conversation with both businesses and citizens to really think about it. So it is about an education, it's about awareness about what people are throwing away. So ultimately trying to reduce consumption, as I've said previously, but ultimately trying to get them to understand what happens if you mix all your materials together and the impact of that, the negative impact of that. But it's ideally, I think it was Andile, point about getting people together. Absolutely. One of the biggest successes I think we're having in Scotland is we're taking our circular economy and our zero waste approach into the cities and regions and opening up different types of conversations. So we've done a lot of mapping of the resource flows within those communities, creating a very visual city scan, as we call it, and then getting industry leaders, business leaders, small businesses, entrepreneurs around the table to look at the opportunities through the kind of lens of the products and materials that have been thrown away, basically. And that is really exciting because you're actually getting that collaboration that Andile and other panelists have been talking about. And I absolutely agree. If you open it up, you're kind of opening up the waste stream, so to speak, for people to look at it and start to understand, the excitement of it all to some extent, the kind of merging of products and material flows to actually create new opportunities, both economically for businesses, in terms of new markets, also for citizens to get involved in things like sharing, recycling, repair, and creating the infrastructure that's required. So that's been absolutely, key to any progress that we've been making in Scotland. Is opening up the kind of waste stream, so to speak, and having those conversations, because actually people want to do it. And it goes back to that point. I think people genuinely in Scotland, particularly, want to do something. Particularly obviously facing the climate crisis. We had COP26 here in Glasgow last year, and when you got past the kind of rhetoric, individuals were really saying, what can I do? Because some of the big stuff, all the big, the investment, all of the things on the main stage were all very at arm's length, very hard, very inaccessible for the citizen in the street. But they really wanted to do something. So things like reducing food waste, accessing reuse and repair services, starting to think about what they can do in the local community. So again, I think it's TLEC was really, that's the heart of our work as well. How do we create the infrastructure? How do we create at a local level, a role for local government, perhaps, to create the right infrastructure for these things to happen? So instead of actually delivering the services or delivering the businesses, because others will do that, other entrepreneurs or other individual citizens will step forward, but you need to create the infrastructure, whether that's hard infrastructure like buildings, like logistics for people, to access the materials that they're looking for, but bringing people together in the space to be creative. There's obviously some potential fiscal financial support for those small businesses. We do that. We invest, over the last couple of years, we invested something like £15 million, well, that is in your currency, into about 250 different businesses. So there are things that we can do from a kind of government level. But ultimately, it's about creating the right environment and the right infrastructure. But it is the thing about commercialisation. It's interesting for us because we have a very efficient recycling system. I think in Scotland, but it's all about collection. We can collect the materials, but we export 75% of the materials that we collect for recycling out of Scotland. Now, if you think about it, I think somebody said it about the jobs. We know that for every one job there is in the collection of materials for recycling, there's another 8 jobs in the reprocessing, remanufacturing, resale, resupply of materials back into the economy. So we're basically exporting jobs. We're exporting economic opportunity for our citizens. So I think that's the heart of the opportunity. If you're really thinking about zero waste, it's what can we do with the materials? How can we reduce the impact of the materials in the first place in terms of consumption? But ultimately, when they become assets in our community, how can we maximise that asset for local economic and local social value? That's what we really should be thinking about, rather than thinking about it, how do we get rid of it as quickly as possible, because it's waste and it's something that needs to be taken out of our communities. And disposed of somewhere else, to the detriment of either other communities or other parts of the environment.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Chad, maybe you can come in here before I request Andile to come in. We spoke about the people problem earlier on. What are the most effective things we can do to reach net zero, especially at ground level?
Sure. I'll get to that right now, but I just want to touch on something Ian said again. Ian highlighted the amount of investment they're making locally in their own country. And it just sparked this thought I had, because as a small business in South Africa, we're in quite a unique situation. We essentially, we get recognized for a lot of the work we do locally, and we constantly winning awards, etc. But our current 2 biggest funders is the UK government and the government of Canada, which is so ironic because we're doing all this work locally, but still our local government is not making the effort to actually develop local skills and local solutions. We have all the skills we need to do this net zero waste vision locally, but the environment is so difficult, especially for innovation. There's no breeding ground for innovation. So what people tend to do is avoid trying to work with our government. That's what we have done because of our lessons learned. We've burnt ourselves so many times. We do all we can, but we need that partnerships. And the conversations is the same every year. We need to sit together. We need to chat. We need to do this. Doesn't make a difference, unfortunately. And so we have to go outside our own country to try and find funds to develop solutions locally, which is kind of sad. And it's just not the breeding ground, like I say, for innovation. But just going to your question, Tabang, looking on the ground, obviously all our solutions is focused on getting people on the ground. There's this big gap between what people are doing in government, what people are doing in private sector, and what needs to be done on the ground. Again, there needs more collaboration. But for people, like I said earlier, to get involved in this, we need to be speaking their language. We need to build solutions that helps them in their daily lives. So something we're currently busy with, it's called Zero Waste Spaza. It's essentially a plugin to make spaza shops or local convenience stores zero waste shops. And, it's something that's being done already in communities. For example, if you go to a local spaza shop, you can get a little sachet of coffee, for example, but what they do is they're making more packaging when they're doing that. So all we're doing is enabling them to still do what they do, but without creating waste. So again, simple solution to solve people's problems in the community. We also developed a free recycling model, and it's a decentralized method where we set up decentralized recycling warehouses in communities, which makes it accessible to communities. So because the challenge is government has free recycling services, mostly in higher income areas, and this is for various reasons. But again, obviously, because of the different type of residents that lives in those areas, and then there's also the private sector that offer recycling services, but again, you have to pay a fee for that. So you're leaving the vast majority of people with no recycling services and no plan of action to get their recyclables besides waste reclaimers collecting those recyclables. So we've taken a different approach and actually looked at those type of communities and made solutions that are viable for them by working with the local waste reclaimers as well. So we integrate them into our model. We provide them with PPE, access to the clean recyclables, and it's not difficult. It's telling people to separate their waste, and they want to do it. That's the interesting part. People want to do it. We went into a community that never recycled before. We launched our service. We got a 65% sign-up rate. Of that, 60% was active each week in the recycling model. It is more expensive to set up this model because it's not using a truck. You're not just taking a truck and collecting recyclables and sorting it in a warehouse. It's a bit more capital intensive to set up, but it works for our context. And again, like I said, people in other countries see what we're trying to do and they think it's the right thing. But our country's government still only invests in tenders, which keeps on just increasing the average way of recycling. And that method of recycling, it's mainly derived from the global north. It's a European way of recycling. It's an American way of recycling. We can't use that method only in our country because we have a different context. But yeah, so yeah, we can have many policies, but we need people to understand what needs to be done. We've seen waste integration policies being designed, but still not enough action. So I'm a very big advocate for action over policy. I understand policy is important, especially in a country like South Africa, but without timelines, we can't wait 20 years to see change. Change needed to happen 20 years ago. And so, yeah, maybe that's just my side of the story. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Chad. Andile, can you extend on some of the sentiments that have been shared by your panelists?
Yes, thanks. I think first I just want to once again comment the opportunity for us to participate. And there are two types of conversations, if I can just group. One is what I call boardroom conversations. And I think Telly has gone on to length in terms of what those boardroom conversations should be about around industrial waste and some of the things that she alluded to. And I mean, the stats that Ian puts up, these are the stats that we should at least carry out in terms of messaging. I mean, as a non-executive chairperson of IWASA, I generally tend in this platform to want to then take the discussions into public conversations. And I'm sorry, Chad, you literally nearly got me teary because you see, when I was young, my mom used to knit clothes for me. And then so I'm trying to answer the question, what is net zero waste vision? In my context, how I've internalized it. And then we used to buy what we used to call old clothes, old clearer. There'll be a place where you go and buy old clothes. And I remember when I first discovered that you actually have to buy clothes from a retail store. It was just a huge concept for me. I ended up as a student working for Edgar's Church Street. I even worked at the ladies' sale area. And what Edgar's used to do, all the credited clothes that people return to the store, they'll then put them at the sale area. So now when you fast forward 26 years later, we're talking about recycling. And I'm saying, how do we take that conversation back to the people? You talk about how we need to make sure that the people are realizing the vision into their daily lives. And for me, I mean, some of the things, example that you've made about the waste spas, and that people can build on. But I also just want to make you aware why I believe we need to take these conversations into the public is because government is reflective of who we are as a society. And this conversation is very intrusive. It can be very difficult for you to comprehend what are we actually talking about. So please empathize that government actually doesn't understand to the extent that we in the panel understand what we are talking about. I mean, it's just number of opportunities, job opportunities that the value chain of employment that Ian talks about. It's something that should be a norm in terms of everybody should be aware of the amount of local jobs can be created through the circular economy. You take the impact that it makes from skills, from SMME development, with Eddie actually mentioning localization. We tick all those boxes. But who is there to bring those conversations in the public so that then who they are role players, then they can take those conversations into boardrooms and government. And I was just thinking about something so simple that I believe SALGA should be engaged. I mean, I served in a local ward committee, and I essentially believe every ward should have what we call a waste committee, where then all the aspects of waste can then be discussed, where these conversations then can be taken there, back in terms of the amount of impact and social innovation can be extracted. So I'm just saying that for me, we need to make the conversation comfortable. Right now, waste to a lot of people, it's actually an uncomfortable. If somebody was saying, they were talking about the renewables and the power, and they were saying, oh, when did this person now be an advocate of environment and waste? Yet people every day wash clothes, right? Instead of buying new clothes. And all we can just explain to people, you know, why are you washing clothes every day? So I'm just saying that, I'm still saying that we need to go back to the public and make the conversation comfortable and build the population in terms of the community, because all the innovation, sustainability, commercialization is going to come from there. And then sell the vision and say you are living the vision in your daily lives. And then again, Chad, once they elect the representatives who become our government, these conversations become easy, which is what separates countries like Scotland and Canada, because the people that are in charge are comfortable with this conversation. And then people like us and Telly and Edith in boardrooms, we can then talk about the other aspect of policy, which is, of course, the enablement. But we can't talk about that one side when we don't have the demand side not aligned with the supply side.
Thank you very much for that. Telly, perhaps you can come in, particularly what you shared earlier on policy coherence. How can that be achieved regarding this matter?
Thank you, Tone. And I just want to quickly touch on how Andile has beautifully packaged without waste the conversation or the some of the sound bites that I gathered from Ian and Chad as well. And Ian mentioned that we need to get people together. And I think in South Africa, we're actually quite good at getting people together. But you're very right. We're not speaking to people and with people in language that personalizes this challenge and gives me a stake or a role to play. And unfortunately, we live in a society where consumers, community members are policy takers and don't necessarily have agency to be policymakers. And obviously they don't sit in the boardrooms, but to shape what goes what gets tabled or gets put on that table. I don't think we have, we've instigated enough agency at a community level, at a consumer household level to say, but hang on, this matters to me and I matter in this conversation. So I find, Ian, that in South Africa, we're very successful with getting people together. Through the local government process, until I used to work for SALGA, I know very well that municipalities do their public engagement processes, but really talking to shared value around the waste stream and parceling out roles and responsibilities, because unfortunately, the dependence is that state provides. And if state provides, then the private sector will provide the service at a cost. And the anticipation by a community level person is that state will then absorb that cost. And unfortunately, it's actually the natural environment that's absorbing that cost. And we're seeing the failure in the system from a local government perspective, from a private sector perspective, because they have to deal with this overpricing challenge of the service, is that we then see filth all on our streets. We see misuse of that infrastructure that does exist. For example, you will find in a community, there is a material recovery facility, there is a place where you can put your separated waste, but it's vandalized. That infrastructure is not protected, it's not maintained, it's not kept up. And then the argument is that we don't have maintenance budgets, we don't have budgets for public safety. Meanwhile, there's a community protection forum that you could be engaging. So I think the conversations and how we have them have to be around value creation and identifying with each aspect of this entire value chain on a personal moral level, but in terms of community agency, I think is quite important. Tarang, before I lose the gist of your question, I thought Chad for me brought this conversation. We're talking about a circular economy, but we're not really operating a circular economy. We're still going to the global market for knowledge and skills and technology. We still import a large bulk of processed goods that we need for our own sustenance. We're importing. So we should be promoting local manufacturing. We should be promoting localization and strengthening the role of industry in supporting various aspects of the waste value chain and the circular economy. So we are not operating a whole of society system. We're not operating a closed system vis-a-vis a circular economy, because many of the inputs that we need, we still go to the market for, like your knowledge, skills, your technologies. Sometimes defunct or obsolete technologies wind up on our coasts. And we have the capacity. We're sitting with innovative institutions, research innovators, right at our doorstep. There's amazing work, for example, that's being done by Nelson Mandela Municipality in Coherence. They're just next door to us as Coherence Development Corporation. And so we're starting to build those bridges. We're partnering with the CSIR around a natural fiber project so that we are able to start tapping into what would be unconventional markets for ourselves, because we are a public entity. And so sometimes those investments in what is unconventional, we're afraid of because, Chad, of those policy strictures. And we do have to have those policy conversations, but I think they need to be tempered with what people's realities and how they attach value is. I think it's important. So I feel like localization will fail if our policy and our fiscal instruments are not shaping up at pace to provide those market instruments, to provide those incentive schemes, to provide the necessary enablers for skills transfer and skills development on a localized scale. The CDC operates in SEZ. We are promoting local manufacturing infrastructure. A large portion of our investors or tenants are from multinational corporations, and we want to open SEZ for local manufacturing. If you look at, and just my last statement, I think that the public sector, especially from an infrastructure delivery perspective, is probably the biggest consumer, Edith, of paper. Public sector is probably the biggest consumer of various other services, and yet we're not enforcing green procurement. For example, in Coherence local municipality in Jeffreys Bay, they paved one of the roads in the municipality with plastic bricks. And shouldn't we be emulating that at scale to say in Soweto, in wherever where we are finding that, at least for the local community roads, let's use bricks that have been made from plastics and build that into policy so that it becomes mandatory for a portion of public spend to be around, to be centered around green procurement, and to look at a portion of public procurement to be mandated to be spent on local labor, local supply chains, local skills development and transfers, making use of local SMEs and cooperatives and so on, especially from a maintenance and operation perspective. And I know it's becoming more and more convoluted as I speak, but I do feel that there's room for policy innovation alongside having those very real conversations. Andile, we're good at gathering people, but I don't think we're very good at solutions that last and traction in those conversations, because we don't embed with real value for what these things, what circular economy really means to me. It means something completely different to a person who's sitting in and washing their clothes in a bin. And it means something completely different for me because I can just flick a switch and turn my washing machine on. And so I think we need to have those conversations, mindful of those differences.
Tilly, it is you that wants to make us open a waste movement, waste church. You know, this is so intense. Edith, can you jump in there on some of the echoes that Tilly has made?
I love the concept of green procurement, Telly. You have to teach me more about that. I think it's something that I'm really keen on learning. I do think that from an agency and empowerment point of view, you've hit the nail on the head. You're correct. We're good at gathering people, but are we really good at answering the question of what's in it for me, for our community?
Sure.
What's in it for me? I've got primary issues that I need to deal with. I've got school fees to pay. I've got food to put on the table. Now you're telling me that I must be conscious about how I consume the hard-earned materials or food that I've put on the table. It's not my primary concern. But actually, if I go back to a bit of what Andile has said, I think our very nature as Africans, we've never really been wasteful people. We've reused and recycled even before the concept of reuse and recycle was a thing. I think that we need to go back to the basics of remembering just who we are as the people. You know, I visit my mother every Sunday, and every Sunday in an ice cream Tupperware, she gives me food to bring back to my home. And that has just been the way it's always been in our family. But I think that to make it real for communities and for people to bring back that agency, we do have to answer the question of what's in it for me? How do people organize themselves so that they can form their own cooperatives that can bring in some form of income while promoting environmentally friendly and sustainable practices in their communities? I grew up in Soweto in Pimville, and one of my neighbors was very environmentally conscious, and our street was one of the cleanest streets. And we call it Isganga, where it's an illegal dumping site. But those were eradicated by one man in our street because he said, you are not going to dump your waste here in this open space. And the community rallied around him. So we need more of those type of champions, and we need to find a way in which we can identify them, empower them with the knowledge and the tools that they require in order for them to do the work that they need to do in their communities. Those champions do exist. I think that it's how we find them, how we empower them, and also truly putting our money where our mouths are. What do we need to do in a community to build a material recovery facility? You know, I see in open spaces, even in affluent areas such as Sandton and Bryanston and Lone Hill, spaces where reclaimers have taken the areas and they separate their waste. And In some instances, communities are up in arms that the value of their homes is going to be depleted because of these activities that are happening, without looking at the environmental benefit of the work that the reclaimers are doing. So perhaps it would be more important as well to conscientize even those that are in those affluent areas and get them to understand the value that reclaimers and the informal sector brings with the work that they're doing. And I think that sometimes the solutions don't need to be so high level that they don't talk to the ordinary citizen. We do need to bring it home and make it practical. What can I do with my son's school to promote recycling? What do I do with my old magazines and newspapers? I love Drum Magazine. I read it all the time. What do I do with my magazine? Is there a way in which I can get the school governing body to encourage recycling and use the school as a bring point for recycling materials that's going to benefit the school? I think that agency and that empowerment is so critical in us making it real for ordinary citizens.
100%. Chad, do you want to come in there? And then we'll have Andile.
Oh, I can't believe I was still muted. 2022. Yeah, sure. I agree with what most of the panelists just mentioned. It sounds like, it's a multiple approach you have to take to get this. But I think one thing I want to touch on is that while we're chatting about net zero, we have to look at what is the actual thing we are discussing and why we're discussing net zero. We're not just discussing net zero because it's a nice term. It's because it's linked to something more serious, and that's called climate change. And something Andile mentioned earlier after I spoke was empathizing with government and making the conversation comfortable. Unfortunately, this is not a comfortable conversation. It's not something we should be empathizing with government for. This is a very serious conversation. It's not a nice to have thing. And I think we need to be more serious about it. Again, there's many of these events taken all over the place, all over the world, where we have these big conversations, these big seminars, lots of panel discussions, and it's good to bring the awareness to the table. But I don't see the seriousness being taken from everybody, especially government. And again, for our generation, it might not be that important, but for the next generation, it is very serious. Hence why we have many young climate activists, because these are the guys that should be in the positions and making the decisions, not the current decision makers, because they're not going to feel the brunt of their decision making right now. And so, there's a lot of labeling going around in terms of the youth's view around climate change and not understanding the reality. And I think that's where, I'm in between that young generation and the older generation. And so I have a good balance and sense of what's it like in reality versus what's it like for the youth and their vision of what needs to happen. So, I unfortunately, I cannot sympathize or empathize with government and Andile. I believe they have a very important role, and they need to open their eyes to what's happening. I think internationally, we've seen the crisis happening in terms of climate. South Africa has been fortunate. We haven't been hit with many severe issues. Drought's been happening for many years. We've seen what happened in KZN recently with the big flooding. But I feel that as soon as something really severe happens, everybody's going to everyone's going to open their eyes. And this conversation of comfort is going to fall away very fast. And so, I know we do work like that. We're very reactive, unfortunately, in South Africa. But we also have history to understand that comfort is not what brings change. Apartheid government wanted people to be comfortable with their ruling. People were not comfortable. This is the same severity that needs to be used to get the changes happening. And I cannot be comfortable, unfortunately, and I cannot empathize. So I will do what I can on my side. And that's my bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Andile, you have a lot to account for here. And you're so right, Chad, it's so drastic. In spring, it's cold. In winter, it's too cold as well. So we're just so confused. So you're so right that climate change is quite a big thing. But let me hand it over to Andile that, echoed some of these sentiments.
Yeah, thank you. I think let me just start with chat. What I mean by empathy is just to get them to understand that where we are, they are not with us. And we need to go back and pretend like this does not exist and then bring them along. And I think that's the patience maybe you might not have. And, from a design thinking point of view, that is very critical because if we leave them behind, they then actually going to undo all the good things that we are doing. I think for me, and one of the things I've taken out of this platform that has built me forward is that the problem is a human being. And in this conversation, I am also a problem. And I had to reflect, what is it that I'm not doing? And I've taken some of the things from maybe what is it that I can show, not tell, to say this is possible. I mean, I come from deep proof as the way to end. Like it is, I see the amount of, they call it waste, open spaces, people are littering. I see economic opportunities, and I sit with pain. I mean, unfortunately, where I am, this thing just hits me as a person. You talk about those concepts, climate change as a conceptual. To me, they are reality. We're going to have the consequence of the issues that we're talking about the same way as people are dealing with load shedding. When they actually discover, like 20 years from now, to say, wow, we didn't realize at this point in time, this is what was happening. My duty as Andile and responsibility is to say, how can I take these conversations outside to create a balance between policy and demand? We take them outside. I'm just making a simple practical example. Yes, I accept that we have to import things. Now, I come from an electronics background. We have to import things. We always buy new things. But what about just making sure that those things that have been bought don't go to grave? Just that concept, I'm repeating what I said. I can show you job creation, right, to the politician that's not willing to listen. Localization, SMME development, and skills development. Am I doing it? No. What do? I also buy, right? But at least you are doing something. That's why when you talk about the waste plaza, it's for me, I can tell you right now, I don't have a place where I can go and buy a refurbished television, refurbished computer at the mall. I don't. So what am I doing to show the responsible people, which is government, who are policymakers, who create the enabling environment? And I must also say, how can I, and these are the questions that I'm literally asking myself. Unfortunately, Kelly is not here. She said something very important. It's easy for us to gather people in South Africa. Now the question is, how do we leverage on the gathering of people to have a waste conversation in those gatherings? What am I doing as Andile? Because we need to show those that are responsible, not tell them what to do. So those are just some of the things that I've taken as building forward from the comments that have been made here. And again, Ian, in South Africa, it's easy when you put up those stats than I do. So I will be quoting you in terms of the number of jobs that you are exporting. And I will be asking myself, what is different that we are not doing that you are doing? I'm just basically saying I'm grateful for the opportunity and thanks to everyone, because I've certainly built forward. I'm certainly going to do what within my responsibility. I'm going to rally IWASA members around this conversation, and we're going to maybe see what quick wins we could demonstrate. And I really thank you for your input in IP, because you've essentially asserted some of the ideas that I had, but I didn't want them to come from me. So a lot of you, I'll be quoting you in my board conversation, and please allow that for me, Chet. And whenever I find impatient people in the policymakers, I'll tell them, let me explain. I'm being empathetic, but I have a guy called Chet who is not. So you are better with me with chess. So, and if you don't work with me, who's willing to understand that you don't have a conceptual understanding of the vision that is being tried to create, there's someone who doesn't have the patience to allow you to do that. Thanks, Tabang. Thank you.
Thank you, Andile. So I'm just going to read the comments from those that are tuned in, and there's also some questions as well, so we can all answer interchangeably, and please then integrate that with your closing remarks. We can go on and on regarding waste, indeed. So this is from Samantha. From birth to death, morning till night, paper is part of who we are and how we live out our lives. Love that statement, Edith. So you brought it home for Samantha there, Edith. Thank you. There was also another one, 15 million GBP is a lot of money here, Lane. So I think, and then they added lol. So I guess they found humor in that figure, Ian, the 15 million GBP. Yeah, so maybe you can, I don't know, extend on that. Yeah, and then Mark says, do the panelists think that the extended producer responsibility regulations for the packaging industry have made any difference to the volumes of waste going to landfill, or is it too soon to tell? What percentage of industry players have registered for the ERP scheme, or are some avoiding the process? I'll just repeat that question. It's quite packed. So do the panelists think that the extended producer responsibility regulations for the packaging industry have made any difference to the volumes of waste going to landfill, or is it too soon to tell? What percentage of industry players have registered for the ERP scheme, or are some avoiding this process? So please integrate your closing remarks with the answer. We'll start with Ian, and then we'll go to Telly, and then we will have Edith and Andile and so forth, and Chad. Okay.
Yeah. Quite a few things I'd probably like to cover. If I could, just picking up on before I answer the questions. Just going back to Chad's point about local authorities investing in innovation and infrastructure. I mean, to be honest, well, in terms of waste and recycling, our local municipalities have not been investing, yes, in the collection, but not in real innovation. And that's really the shift that the circular economy has really brought, that we are actually managing a bridge out of the kind of waste department into the economic development department, into the kind of community and health departments of local authorities, and joining that up. I want to mention right at the beginning about the systems approach. It's really getting all of those people around the table. And we're very good at that as well, being a small country, and getting people around the table and turning that into action is still the challenge, but it's trying to understand. So that's the kind of breakthrough for us, is to get local authorities to actually invest in innovation, enterprise in the circular economy space at a local level. Now, obviously, our £50 million has been, helped at. We've come in and co-financed some of those projects, and that's not something that has been ingrained in our kind of performance around recycling or waste in the past. It's something that's probably much more in the last couple of years. I think the other thing, just good. I mean, Andile, great points. I mean, I really love the idea about comfortable, because I don't think our ministers, our government, are comfortable with waste at all. They like recycling, they like the circular economy, they like the use of material. They get very excited. I think we all do. But waste is an uncomfortable conversation. So switching that narrative into, well, how can we do something much more impactful at a local level, really does get people's attention, both in terms of jobs and social cohesion. But the thing about our journey, what I say, is away from that kind of waste, that kind of linear pipe of moving materials out of communities and away, basically, whether that's to landfill or incineration, shifting that to more circular economy. The key thing, and I think everybody probably said it in their own way, probably better than I have, is this is about people. This isn't about big kit, big infrastructure. This is about people. And I think the one thing that we perhaps do forget is that we need to invest in these people. We need to empower people individually, communities, collectives, because people do want to be part of this, but we need to invest in it. And I think that's a great statement you made about, what can we show, not tell people. I think it's really my take home for this, and that's been a big thing about us. We've invested in communities. We've had a kind of net a zero waste town initiative, invested in communities, and the success for that for us has been not being prescriptive. So I think, I've been involved in this, arena for about 30 years. In the past, we have gone in and told people what to do, or we've come in with a model and said, this is how it works. Can we just fit it into your community? But I think what's really changed in the last couple of years is we've been going in and supporting, not being prescriptive, empowering and going with the community, what their priorities are, how they want to build, whether it's infrastructure or connections or networks or initiatives, and allowing that, and providing that support, whether it's financial, but more importantly, it's about expertise and training, and embedding those skills in the communities. And I think that's where we've had the biggest impact, and it's the bit that we've really tried most to focus on. Whilst, as I call it, the industrialization of recycling is still, it's still out there. Big business wants to extract as much materials as possible, and that probably is the only question. The EPR question is specifically around South Africa, so I don't know too much about it. But careful what you wish for. So a lot of the EPR schemes that we have in the UK, a lot of the EPR schemes we have in the UK are very effective in terms of keeping material out of landfill, but they're run at industrial scale. They're basically sucking out the materials, out of our communities, out of Scotland. Some of the export numbers I gave, is because of EPR schemes and delivered at a very macro level, with lots of very big business, basically. And absolutely good for the environment, but they're not very good for the communities, because they reduce the accessibility of some of the commodities that these local communities are looking to access, both from a reducing consumption perspective in terms of reduced repair and going on about paper, but actually basically just the economic opportunity that these communities could have. So that's the key thing for the circular economy, is it's a distributive economy. Our waste economy is very much about it's still extracting resources out of our communities into big factory, into big productions, or into big landfill. But the circular economy is a distributive economy. It's about keeping material and assets in the community, and retaining the value again and again from both a social and an economic, and clearly from an environmental point of view, and reducing climate change. That's the secret. That's what really gets everybody excited about this. This is about enhancing the local community. Now, whether that's in city communities, urban communities, or on the Highlands of Scotland, or on some of our islands, where these opportunities are very scarce. So taking away the opportunity from people, sucking that material out and taking it off somewhere else is really, is particularly for our rural communities, is another way of, encouraging, well, not encouraging, but disincentivizing people to stay in those communities. And so we see a lot of people leaving the island communities, because there isn't jobs, there isn't economic opportunity for them. So that's absolutely shifting to a more circular approach, but using that language rather than the waste language, because I don't think ministers, certainly even in our government, get too excited about waste management, because it's who likes the concept of waste? We don't like the concept. We don't waste. We don't like to waste time. We don't like to waste talent. We don't like to waste opportunities. None of us like to waste. So why would we ever get excited about waste?
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Ian. Oh, is that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Oh, great. You have these random pauses, so I don't know if it's a break or thank you so much.
Inviting me along, and that's been really great. I've really enjoyed listening to
the
other panelists. I've made loads of notes.
Thank you. Sure. Just to bring clarity on what Samantha mentioned. So the 15 million pounds that you mentioned, she was saying in the context of the 300 million rands, it's quite a lot. The investment figure is quite huge. So she just provided clarity. Thank you, Samantha.
And that 15 million, that is our money. That's levered. There's leverage on that. Is another 60 million has come in for the private sector.
Let's not even convert
that's investment that we've invested in something like 250 businesses across.
No, that can pay for our entire education system and buy our economy. So that's just another discussion altogether. Thank you so much, Ian. Can we have Edith just with closing remarks?
This has been quite useful. Is EPR diverting waste from landfill? Yes, it is. It would be great if our municipal landfills had weigh bridges that worked so that we could know how much the percentage was that we are diverting. So I think from an infrastructure point of view, the municipalities themselves have a lot of work to do. Is it new? Yes, it is. Do we still have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. And I think that we sit in a position where we have high rates of unemployment. We have young people who need to be encouraged to look at careers that may not be as sexy as being an influencer on Instagram.
Sure.
And perhaps the paper mill and the paper recycling industry may not look attractive, but it is sustainable and paper is renewable. And, and I think that bringing the conversation back to the ordinary citizen to say what's in it for them is going to be ongoing. It's something that we need to concentrate on, bring a lot of energy to. There's a lot of awareness and dispelling some myths that do exist as well in South Africa, and also bringing a better understanding of the circular economy and what it means for all of us. We don't have an option but to actually do something about it. And I love the comment that you made, Tilly, that what are we going to do about it, and who's going to do the work, and where does the responsibility lie? I often look at the man in the mirror and I say that it begins with me and it begins with you. You know, we have a responsibility to leave this earth a better place than we found it. Okay. Someone would say we didn't start the fire, we found it burning, but I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that we do leave something for future generations. And from an EPR point of view, like I say, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I think that the commitment is there. When we engage with our members, it is not an engagement of trying to convince them to do the right thing. I think that the commitment is there from industry to want to do the right thing, to make sure that the investment does go to the right places. So that is encouraging. And I think that from a Fiber Circle point of view, we are encouraged every day when we engage with our members and we engage with members of the community and reclaimer organizations. We see that the willingness, the commitment is there. All we need to do is ignite the investment that needs to happen from an infrastructure point of view, from an education and awareness point of view. And that's the type of things that we will be concentrating on in the next 5 years.
Sure. Thank you very much. Please reiterate the quote that you said. We might not have caused the fire, but we have the responsibility to.
We have a responsibility to switch that fire off.
I'm stating that, but I'm definitely going to quote you. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Robertson.
Thanks, Along. Yeah, just on the EPR question, I think from my lens as working in the collection space and on the ground, we've slowly seen impact happening. We haven't really felt the investment just yet to build the infrastructure, but we do see the changes happening. It is something that's obviously going to take some time. And so, yeah, we're positive about the future and the extra investment that will be going into the collection of the material. And then just to end off, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for all the insights. Yeah, it's so many views and lenses we have to be aware of when we're talking about this topic. But I guess at the end of the day, the most important thing is that, you know, we can know this notion of zero waste, but if it's not accessible to the majority of the people, it's not going to be as impactful as it could be if everyone has access to it. So I think, you know, as advocates for this vision, we all have a role to play to bring this to the majority of the people, because that's the only way we're going to make impact. And I'll just end off by saying, let's not get comfortable. Let's be very serious and hold people accountable. And each of us are accountable. You know, we all have a role to play in this movement. And whether it's a small part, a big part, it's it's something at the end of the day. And don't think that by just taking a water bottle with you each day, you're not making a big impact. That is a big impact. Someone else sees that impact, and you become an influencer, without actually knowing it, by doing your daily things. And yeah, I think we just have to hold us accountable. That's the only way we're going to move forward as a society, as a country. We have to hold our retailers accountable. When we see fruit being packaged in single-use wrappers, one apple, for example, you speak to them and you let them know why it's bad. It is uncomfortable, but we have to make people understand the severity of this topic. And yeah, I just want to again thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to perhaps potentially meeting some of the other panelists in our combined mission in the future.
Thank you so much, Chad. Yeah, that was so empathetic. You empathized a bit with Andile there. Thank you so much. Andile, maybe you can come in there and then we'll close up with Telly.
Yes, and thank you for actually, you almost tied it so nicely. That I think I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. That, the conversation is uncomfortable, but we must understand that people don't like uncomfortable conversation. So what basically have moved us is as my contribution to say, I don't want to be the only one who goes out there and say to the relevant parties, I would like to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. And then when they say, what is it about? And then I start telling them about the net zero waste vision and recycling. So I'm just saying, Chad, I from a design thinking point of view, I wanted to move the audience that felt the discussion was comfortable to a place where we all understand it is an uncomfortable position for a discussion. And I'm saying, let's say that upfront from an empathy point of view. And again, I think from a boardroom conversation, I think we are saying the same thing. We understand this model of net zero waste division. We understand it so well. All we need to do is to take it outside the boardroom and see how we can then show with small wins. And that's where we can collaborate on small wins to show everybody, to increase the size of the population of the people that have been involved in. And Ian, I just want to just say to you, I'm in a non-executive chairperson of IWASA, which is one of the EPR schemes. And in terms of even the question, I think, I'm still caught on when you say, be careful what you wish for. And I just want to thank you for that contribution because, regulations, they might not have, there's what we call unintended consequences. But if you've got the people that are tuned into the right heart, despite the policy framework, they will always come up with other interventions to make sure that the visions are achieved. I'm a very proponent of strategy by value. And I always say between policy and reality, that's where you put strategy, which is the thinking, articulating the vision and living the vision. And not forgetting that this ultimately it is about people. And when you talk about the fire, it is, of course, the people are going to feel the heat. And we just need to be the people that are trying to reduce the amount of heat that people are going to experience on the fire that we did not create. And I just want to thank the panelists for at least building me forward on some of the concepts. And I will never plagiarize because it just helped me articulate some of the narratives. And again, I say it again, I'll be quoting you. It's not me. I'll be saying Edith said it, Chad, and Ian and Julie, and you as well as just facilitating Tabang. You asked the question. And that's for me how we take the conversation outside. It's not going to be about Andile. It's going to be what you ask. So I'm going to go back to those communities in those gatherings that we can easily make in terms of our plan and ask the questions that you've asked and then share with the broader community and public what the panelists contributed to those questions. And that just for me, it could just be my contribution in helping the bigger population and buy in, I think that's the word, into the net zero vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andile. Please do let us know how we can contribute to that initiative. I think a lot of people need to know about it. Telly.
Thank you, Thabang, and thank you once again to this amazing panel. I've got so many sound bites floating around in my head, and so I'm going to try very hard not to repeat anything that anyone else has said, and hopefully nothing that I've said either. But I just want to, and Chad presented a very sobering moment for me. When let's remember that we're having this conversation within the context that we're in a climate crisis. And I think I want to remind that we're having this conversation within a context that we are in Sustainability Week. So by association, we are trying to reach the last mile in terms of the SDGs. Sustainable Development Goals, only 8 years left. And I don't know measurably if and how far we are. But Edith said something about municipal weighbridges. And it just reminded me that, this microcosm or this multiverse, in fact, of sustainability has so many touch points and pain points and weak points. And a team is only as strong as its weakest link. And unfortunately, we have very many weak links. And so I feel, Thabang, that our realities, which present as our problems, need to be our solutions. And to do that, we need to partner. And I feel like this panel, these speakers here on this panel, we need to partner. We need to have this conversation together when we leave this room.
Can I facilitate the conversation now?
Yeah, I think you're enjoying it. But quick points that I think we need to talk about is that our reality is that we're sitting continentally, we have a huge infrastructure deficit. I think way over 100 billion on the continent. In South Africa, I think our infrastructure deficit is about 48 billion, something like that. Now, I'm not quite sure of the figures, so I'm not going to quote them. The waste treatment or waste management sector, I think, contributes, and I also stand to be corrected, between 4 and 7% in terms of emissions, GHG emissions from your fugitive gases from landfill. And I'm not talking about the entire value chain, but specifically, I think, in terms of landfill. So what might appear to be a really small contribution to emissions has so many downstream opportunities for us to start dealing with our energy crisis, which is a huge problem. With our water crisis, for example, a lot of industrial processes are still using fresh water. How do we use wastewater? So how do we open up this waste discussion to include other resources instead of just your solid waste? We have local governments, by and large, who go without spending their full capital grants. So the entirety of their capital grants is not expended to its fullest. That is opportunity. How do we influence the policy architecture to unlock opportunities for that money to be tracked away from returning to the treasuries, but to be repurposed to unlock waste value chains? So the policy discourse becomes quite important in the role we play. Goal 17 of the SDGs for me is critical in the sense that it might sound like just rhetoric, just sounds like words. We need to partner for the SDGs, we need to partner for circular economies and so on. But in reality, we sit here in this panel, we're sharing ideas, and we're becoming more empathetic to each other's industry challenges. However, we also need to not be complacent. And we need to be able to gather together and form a lobby group that says, why is local government not expending all of its capital grants when we're sitting with an energy crisis, with a waste crisis, a climate crisis? How do we agitate with government? How do we agitate with local government? But also, how do we enable and build them and share this knowledge that is sitting in this room with them, so that we build a coalition of the knowing, a coalition of the able, and a coalition of the willing. I think those are important things so we reach critical mass, Chad. We've got so many Chads out there doing great things. Do we have critical mass? And we need to be able to put our heads together around that. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Fortunately, we can go on for days, but we've reached the end of the conversation. Thank you so much for your contributions and also just for shedding light in your respective organizations. I really wish you the best, and I do hope that there will be a collaboration amongst all of us. I'm adding myself in there as well to facilitate the collab. So thank you so much for your time and all of the best. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Ciao.
Thanks, guys. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.